I'm in the middle of the operation and the guts are all over the table. Like, I can't send the patient out into the world. Only bad things will happen.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Continuous Delivery Office Hours, where we delve into the topic of modern software delivery. I'm your host, Tony Kelly, and I'm joined by the brains of the operation, Bob Walker and Steve Fenton. And the question that we're going to answer this week is, why should I prioritize continuous delivery over other improvements? But maybe we'll start with a quick summary. Steve, I'll put the spotlight on you. What is continuous delivery?
Yeah, so continuous delivery in its simplest form is making sure that our software can be delivered all the time. So we're not going to spend weeks hardening the software. We're not going to have software that is untested and in an unknown state. We're going to have super high confidence at all times that if we needed to, we could deploy that software. That's the idea. We might not choose to deploy it all the time, but we could if we needed to. That's probably the crucial thing about continuous delivery.
Very good. Thank you. And Bob, I'll pass it over to you. If maybe change the question a little bit. Why should I prioritize continuous delivery over other potential improvements?
Yeah, so it comes back to the big three: time, risk, and money, when it's all said and done. So time being the longer that you have between your deployments, be it a week, a month, a day, a year, whatever the case may be, that's not time that you're going to get back in terms of getting value from the change that you're making. In addition, it could also take a tremendous amount of time to deploy something that's only been changed or deployed once a quarter or once every 6 months. Those are typically where we hear about the 6-hour deployments or the 5-hour deployments or something along those lines. It also increases the risk as well, and that's a huge part of it. It's the riskier it is to do the deployment because, again, you've had such a long window between your deployments. I remember doing a quarterly deployment, and the next 2 weeks was basically fixing all the bugs because we changed so much. And so you're increasing that risk. And then it's also, when it comes back to, it's the money, because anytime you have bugs, especially critical bugs, so show-stopping bugs, that has a material impact on the company itself. Myself, I was responsible, or my team was responsible, for taking down an entire production SQL server that impacted dozens of applications. And it's basically stopped a bank cold for a morning. That's not a good thing. That was a very expensive mistake, to say the least. And because of that, those are the risks that you have, and that has that material impact on your money.
I love that. And the funniest thing about software delivery, and I'm sure this probably applies in other industries as well, but when you have something like a deployment that goes wrong, it's not necessarily because of the deployment that there's a failure,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's an accumulation of all those changes you've made. And, if you haven't deployed for 6 months, there's a big accumulation there of the risk, just like you said. And then if that deployment goes wrong, the business immediately is like, well, we don't want to do this as often. We need to slow this down. So the gut reaction that we have in response to a problem is, let's do it less. And that's like the opposite of the instinct that we need to have. And this is why continuous delivery is so powerful, because by doing it more often, we're actually making them far lower risk, right? Because we haven't changed as much of the system before we do a deployment.
I think what's funny to me is, back to what you said, you want to do it less. You end up in a situation where it's almost instinctively businesses do this. They are risk adverse organizations. I've yet to meet a company that's just YOLO it, go for broke type of thing. Um, well, there are the ones that are out there, but very rarely do you have that, because that has a material impact on your life, because you're not going to get paid. You're not going to be able to pay your mortgage, everything along those lines. But so they want to reduce risk, but ironically, they increase risk by doing these very actions. And you see this happen. This isn't just a software delivery. This isn't just a computing uh, programming problem. It's almost instinctively just something that companies do across the board, regardless of the department that you're in.
And people, I guess, because like
Yeah.
I had a bad experience at a dentist once, And then when the appointment rolled round for the next checkup, I kind of didn't want to go because last time I went,
Exactly.
it hurt a lot. And so my body was telling me that if I went to that dentist appointment, it was going to be painful. But of course, the longer I put off that checkup, the more likely there would be something that would need to be done in the future.
And strangely enough, using that analogy, if you just did a little bit of extra work in terms of your dental health, such as probably, I'm gonna guess you weren't flossing as much as you had. They probably yelled at you about that. Probably weren't using mouthwash. Probably wasn't using the appropriate brushing techniques. So they probably yelled at you. It's like, hey, if you did this, it wouldn't be as painful. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to instead just not go to the dentist. No, I'll prevent this from happening. So if we go bring it back to deployments, it's, well, I'm not going to do deployments. I'm not going to fix what the problem is. I'm just going to do it less. I'm not going to fix, okay, why did my database deployment fail? Why do we have all these bugs after we went out there? Well, it's because we didn't automate it. That particular section wasn't automated. That in fact was very manual. Well, we're not going to automate it. We're just going to do it less, or we're going to add more automation in there. We're going to make it even worse. So there are more hoops that people have to jump through.
It's funny actually because my dentist story finishes with the same outcome that I did try manually flossing more and doing all of these other pieces of advice the dentist gave me. And funnily enough, the one visit I had where they went, "Oh, things were actually really good in here," was after I bought an electric toothbrush and I automated the process of brushing my teeth with this really great toothbrush, and it did a much better job at getting between the teeth. And yeah, it just, the dentist could tell that something had actually changed on that visit, so that was kind of funny.
If I could I play devil's advocate a little bit on some of it? So
Mhm.
some people watching may be thinking, "Hey, we work on let's just call it features at various times, and different features take different lengths of time to create and finish and get rolled in." So I'm working on a feature; it's going to take me a couple of weeks to finish. How in that scenario, how do I keep my software deployable at all times, or should I be trying to?
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. You should. 100. Like this is a passion project of mine. This is a very something that I really want to talk about. So that's why I'm going to jump right in on something like that. But yes, absolutely. So that's a really common question, and that's actually a really fairly common thing that I ran across when I was a developer. So I was a developer for 15 years. I was like, well, I can't deploy this. It's not finished. It's half finished. Terrible analogy, but it's, if you look at it like, I'm in the middle of the operation and the guts are all over the table. Like, I can't send the patient out into the world. Only bad things will happen. But it was more along the lines of continuous delivery is all about making sure your software is in a deployable state. Now, what does that mean? It means that you can deploy to production, and you also need to change your mindset from I'm deploying code from I'm releasing functionality to my users. And all too often when it comes to software deployments, the two are intertwined and they're very tightly coupled together. And you see this quite frequently. And I was just as bad as anybody. That's the way that I always thought. It's like, oh, it's ready to deploy, merge it in, happy days. But instead, what you should be doing is you should be doing more. It's kind of like they call it trunk-based development, where basically I'm making very small changes and I'm merging them in continuously. So at no point does a branch live longer than, say, a couple hours, no more than a day at most. That's the ideal state. And then what you do is you leverage something like a feature toggle. And so you're hiding those features behind it. Now, the benefit behind doing this is that you're always deploying, and you can even turn on that toggle. Hopefully you have it in such a state where it's much better than just a simple binary of it's either on or off, depending on the environment I'm in. Maybe you have a bit more fine-grained control where you can say, I want to target this particular team. I want to target this particular user. I want to do this particular region. I'm going to turn it on, or these beta users, and let them test it. Let them test it in production. Smash up against it, find all the sharp edges before you release it out to the rest of your users. Because that's really the key, is you want to get your software out there as fast as possible, but you want to get feedback, but at the same time, you want to do it in a very safe way. So that's where doing feature toggles is very important, but you also need to be able to deploy very frequently. So for example, for Platform Hub, we released it to our cloud customers in September. That was hidden behind a feature toggle for quite some time. In fact, I had access to it in February of last year, and I was banging against it and I was trying it out, and I knew there'd be sharp edges. I was a pre-alpha customer, and I knew that I accepted that risk. But That's how long like a feature toggle can last for that long. But some toggles, they might only last a few weeks, but they can last up to months and months and months. But again, this allowed us to have people test it, but not only just test it, but actually test in production. It was on my personal instance. This was the instance I used at conferences. This was the instance I used for demos when I was talking to customers. It was a production instance.
Yeah, and this is basically like, if you're building something, you kind of put a screen up and you can build behind that screen. And then you kind of like have a grand opening where you cut the ribbon and let people in. And that's the idea behind these toggles. So you don't have to worry that someone's going to see your half finished work, because that feature in production is not visible. But in development, it's visible and you can be trying it out. And then when it comes to that release strategy, ideally, like, you start offering people to see this thing reasonably early, because that's when the risk starts getting removed, right? Your market risk. When a real person looks at it, tries to use it for real, and says, oh, actually, this thing doesn't do what I was expecting. And then you get this feedback and you're like, right, I understand better now. I've learned. I'm going to actually change direction a bit and make sure that it does cover that use case. And increasingly, we're realizing that this should be kind of quite permissive. Like the user should be choosing to see a new thing instead of all this stuff just suddenly being moved. I was on a call yesterday, and we use the same tool for calls every single time for this community call that we do. But this time, some of the stuff had moved around. Like the little icon that showed you participants wasn't at the bottom anymore; it had been moved to the top, and the button that lets you see where a poll is had moved from down the bottom to being like this little call out that kind of appeared. So it was kind of like we were stumbling over all of these changes instead of being told, oh, we're going to move the participant thing because it's going to make your UI cleaner. Would you like to like opt into that now? And you'd be like, oh, right. And then when you need participants, you will remember that you've chosen to now move it to the top. And over time, as users opt into that, there'll be some people who never do, and you probably end up pushing them to it. But you're just letting people do it at their own pace a bit more, instead of just, I mean, I received an email from my shopping provider that said, welcome to our new app experience. And my wife was like, oh no, because like we're used to it. We know how it works. And now it's going to be like learning something from scratch.
And I think one of the things to kind of also think about is when you do this, you also separate, when you separate that concept of deploying a new version of your code from releasing functionality, it changes around what do you mean by a deployment failure? And how do you test for success when you actually deploy a new version of your code to your user base? So when we get into conversations such as red, green, red, green, oh my gosh, thinking about Christmas, we get into conversations around blue, green deployments or canary style deployments or any of basically the TLDR for all of those strategies is I deploy a new version of my code. I have the previous version running in production, and I send some percentage of traffic. I send something over to the new version and I test it and I verify it. But it's really kind of a zero downtime strategy. But what you're doing is you're really making sure that, yes, the application is running. Yes, there's, it passes my important smoke test to make sure that it's not just running, but it actually can do the thing, log in, I can still see everything. And that's really it. Like, you're really testing for those deployment failures. You're not testing to see if the new functionality works. And that also increases your deployment time, which is really great. And it decreases your outage window when you do something along those lines, because you're focused much more on, I just need to make sure that the new version gets out there. That's really all I care about. And I just want to make sure that it's up and running and it's healthy. But when if you're testing out new functionality, which is what we would do with our deployments, that's what I would do. And I would do, say, I remember deploying various pieces of software, and right after we deployed it, like, we would go in and we'd all test out the brand new functionality, make sure all the new functionality worked appropriately. And in fact, I remember one time I got called in on a Saturday. I was in the middle of a bike ride, and they're like, "Well, you need to come back in, and because this functionality that we just deployed isn't working, and it's in fact causing some pretty critical errors." And I was like, "Well, I'm 20 miles away, man." It's like, So I'm about an hour and a half away. It's like, well, can you speed it up? I'm like, an hour 20? Not really in a good spot to get, and this predated Uber. It's like this, it's like not really in a good spot to get home, to say the least. But to the point of like, you don't have that risk. You don't have that risk of the functionality not working um, suddenly after the deployment because you're controlling when that functionality is turned on and off. So really, you're just focusing on the actual what is being deployed and is it healthy? Is it working?
Yeah, it reminds me of the experiment that they do with dogs, where you can train a dog to catch a dog biscuit, and they're really good at it, right? Despite the fact that their eyes make it hard for them to see what's about to go in their mouth. Once they get used to it, biscuits are enough of a reward that they'll get it every time. But if you then throw two dog biscuits, they get neither of them because they can't decide which one they're going to go for. So if your deployment is the moment that your new functionality is going out, you're kind of dividing your attention between two biscuits. And you're much more likely to miss something that's deployment related because you're looking at the functionality, or you'll miss something functionality related because you're, looking at the deployment, or because you're trying to skip between them, you miss both, right? So yeah, it's good to separate those moments because it's going to massively de-stress them as well. And I should probably call out as well, the three principles we're talking about here: trunk-based development, progressive delivery, and feature flags, is actually the topic of your book, Bob, isn't it? The TPF.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wrote it, I want to say last year. The years are starting to blend together when I work at Octopus after a while. But yes, I wrote it last year because I was seeing so many people go down this path of we want to have our blue green or we want canary style deployments. And I'm like, well, what problems are you trying to solve? And it's like, well, we want to test features before they go out to our user base, and we want to slowly roll it out. And so by redirecting traffic, that's going to enable them. Like, you're solving the wrong problem. Like the it's the right. Sorry, you're not solving the wrong problem. You're solving the right problem, but you're doing it in the wrong way. So bad analogy. It's I want to steer my car, but instead of steering my car with my hands, I'm steering my car with my knees. So only bad things will happen on top of that. Uh, the other thing that, as you were talking, Steve, one of the things that kind of popped into my mind was it's not just releasing the functionality, but then it also solves a couple of these other problems, specifically around dependencies with other services. As much as we would like to say, hey, every service should be completely isolated, its own unit of work, independently deployable, that's great. That's very easy to do in terms of if you just do like a SOA-based architecture or a microservice-based architecture. But if everyone's interacting over, say, REST services or message buses, you still have to have something else picking up that message. You still have something else on the other side of that REST request. But if that functionality isn't enabled or it's not turned on in production, you can deploy whenever. And then when your dependent services, when those third-party services, when they get upgraded, you can just, that's when you can turn it on. So you're not tied and you don't have to worry about all this dependency management that we're going through. And I didn't really talk about that in the book, but that's something that I just started thinking about because I'm actually looking at solving that right now. How can we do that with Octopus? But I was like, gosh, if you just did feature toggles, yeah, you really wouldn't have this problem, would you?
Yeah, it's maybe there's a second edition in 2026.
Yeah.
This is crucial because um, I've had conversations with organizations that have spent all of this money investing in microservice architecture, but then their deployment is this incredible piece of coordination where they've almost like they've arranged this kind of big plan, and there's all these boxes like, right, this service has to be deployed first, and then we
Yep.
can deploy this one. That then means these can be, and it's like you're hoping that as you go through this process, you don't find that actually I can't deploy this one until this one's done, but this one depends on this thing, which can't be done yet because of this. And you're like, oh no, I've basically got like a deadlock of deployment dependencies. So yeah, or you do what some organizations do where you just hit deploy on everything, and for 10 minutes, like nothing is working in a predictable fashion. And
Yep.
that's kind of like we've given up on trying to solve this. So feature toggles, like you can deploy everything and then you can start switching things on.
That's how you end up in a situation like I ended up back in my 20s and early 30s, where we could only deploy at 2 a.m. Saturday because we just basically said, you know what, we're going to have an outage window, live with it. We're like, okay. And then that was contractually written into it because this was one of the services that had to be up and online essentially 24/7. And we looked at all of the metrics, we looked at all of the telemetry that was coming in, and we said the number of people who were using our applications 2 a.m. from 2 a.m. Saturday to 6 a.m. Saturday was this much compared to everybody else. And we just basically said, listen, we're not going to, that's when our outage windows are going to be. And I was like, okay. So, but yeah, to your point, that's exactly what happens. It's either you have this really complex deployment plan with all your different microservices, which basically I would say you really didn't do microservices. What you've done is you just broke up your monolith. You still have the monolith, but you just have it in different parts. Now you have components of a monolith that you have to worry about.
Yeah.
Or you just say, we're just going to deploy and YOLO it and good luck everybody else.
Yeah, I think the deployment is a really good indication of whether you really do have proper services. You should be able to be like, the whole point of having microservices is that we can solve the problem of trying to have 300 people working on the same application by breaking it up. And they should be able to be reasonably autonomous. Obviously, they need to make sure there's compatibility. There's a bit of versioning maybe to take care of, but ultimately they should be able to be deploying on their own cadence, right? So they have stuff that they want to deploy, they should be able to do it.
Yeah, I also want to address kind of an elephant in the room as we talk about continuous delivery, which is, I know it's been brought up a couple of times, and I remember being at a conference when somebody asked me this, where they was like, well, we're going to a GitOps-based strategy, so we don't need continuous delivery. And it's not an either or, it's a yes and type of thing. So if you look at the principles of GitOps, essentially what it is, when you boil everything down, because there's really only 4 principles, which is what I love about GitOps, is it's very clear. Its goal is to make sure that your desired state of whatever it might be matches the current state. And when the desired state changes, the current state needs to change as well. So the desired state of, say, so you have your manifest file in Git, that's your desired state. Your current state is what's running in Kubernetes. When you change Git, you want to have a mechanism to update Kubernetes. But it's basically a reconciliation mechanism. That's all it's doing. Continuous delivery is going to be all the bits and pieces up until the point when I make that change inside of Git. And so really, GitOps basically solves that kind of last mile of getting that change from your Git repository to Kubernetes. But there's going to be all that other stuff that goes into it.
Yeah, and it also makes sure that it's not going to drift from that state as well, right? So,
yeah,
if someone goes and kind of fiddles with something, it gets put back to how it should be. It's kind of nice. It's like a self-tidying system.
Yeah, and I absolutely love it. I think when you combine the both of them together, it solves a number of different problems that you have out there, because it's also going to be monitoring post-deployment as well. So if something does change, so if my Kubernetes cluster does change after I do my deployment, after I update my Git repository, then it's going to go in and it's either going to alert me, which that's great, or ideally it will self-reconcile. It's like, nope, I'm going to change this up. So
yeah, thank you both for the chat, and we will see you all next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everybody.
See ya.